standing at the west end of our hoop house. We've oriented ours so that the long sides are to the south and the north. We did that because we wanted to maximize the amount of sunlight that the greens would get in the winter, especially. That was where we were focused. So we've got the ends on the east and the west. Most of the weather, when it's windy or snowy, is coming from the west. So we are ready to close these doors and window to stop the weather coming in when we need to. Our hoop house is 96 feet long, 30 feet wide. We chose a 4-foot bow spacing. You usually get the choice of 4 feet or 6 feet. We got our hoop house early on. It was like 2003. There wasn't a lot of information out there yet or advice. And there weren't the NRCS grants either, so we had to pay for it ourselves. So we were looking for a cheap, affordable structure, but we were also nervous about it falling down in bad weather. So we went with the 4-foot bow spacing, which is stronger against heavy snows and heavy winds, even though we don't get either very heavy here, but that's what we did. We went with 4 feet. So we maybe could have got away with doing 6 feet here. We went with a double plastic layer and inflated by air pumped into the space between them. That gives you a lot more heat insulation at night, and also gives more strength against strong winds or against falling snow. It helps the snow to shed off more quickly. So that's why we made those choices. I don't regret that at all. I think it was a good choice. I wouldn't go for a single plastic layer, because really at night then you've just got a plastic bag between you and outer space. We wanted a long south face because we wanted to let as much sunlight in as possible, but some people do advocate for orienting the hoop house 90 degrees to what I've just said, so that the long walls are to the east and the west. And I think that's to do with not wanting to overheat stuff.
Does it have to do with your geography too, if you're further north or south?
There is something about, in the south you'll be more likely to run the long walls on the east and the west, but I don't know that it's a good idea. I think having the long walls to the south is better, but maybe if you're not focused so much on the winter greens, then you would go the other way around.
Okay, and what are some other features? I see some sort of like peak vents up there, but like what are some, do you got roll up sides, or what are some other features that you look for with a hoop house?
Right. You need to make the decision about whether you're having opening side walls or not. We went with not, partly because, as I said, our main focus was the winter greens, and so we didn't want the potential draftiness that opening side walls could give. So we've gone with the walls all the way down to the ground. It was also cheaper and easier to do, which was a big feature because we were babes in the woods. We didn't know what we were doing. We put up the hoop house with a lot of people. None of us had ever done it before, and so it was easier to have it be a simpler model. So that worked well for us. We've made two big 4-foot by 8-foot opening doors on each end, and a big window above, so that lets the hot air out. So the first thing we do in the day is to open up the windows in the cool weather. In the summer, the doors and windows are open the whole time, and we have a shade cloth over the top. But in the cooler weather, we come along in the morning, we open up the windows, and that lets out the excess warm air.
So what goes on in the summertime then, if this is mainly focused on winter growing?
Right. We do early tomatoes and peppers and squash and cucumbers that we plant in March and April, and we harvest those until end of July. And then we pull those out, and then for the high summer, we either do cover crops or seed crops. We've done seed crops of southern peas. We tried a few other things that didn't work so well, like we tried to do a succession of cantaloupes, but we'd had the early squash in there and too many striped cucumber beetles, so the melons were no good. So nowadays it's usually cover crops or solarizing. Solarizing is a way where you cover the beds with clear plastic, and that kills off any weed seeds near the surface, or any like foliar diseases or the fungal diseases that have spores in the soil. And that has really helped us do good winter lettuce, because we can kill off the diseases.
So it sounds like there's 3 seasons essentially.
Three seasons, yeah.
You have your winter greens growing, you have your early, as you said, tomatoes and stuff, and then the summer is sort of as needed, cover cropping, solarization, just sort of prepping for the fall.
Yeah.
Okay.
Whatever we do in the high summer, we've got to be ready to have it out of there and clear the beds for the fall crops, because that's the most important ones for us.
All right, cool. Well, let's go inside and show you some of the stuff that's going on there.
Sure, yeah. We chose this Gothic arch shaped tunnel rather than the sort of half round Quonset type. With the Gothic arch, you get better air quality because you've got the higher peak and the air can move around. You also get better access to the edge beds because it's a bit taller at the edges, so it's easier for growing slightly taller crops. And also the Gothic arch is better at shedding snow and hail, anything else that might fall on it. We were on a budget at the time. We bought a relatively cheap model. We got it from Farm Tech. They had only just started selling them, and they weren't really able to provide any technical advice. So we had a little bit of trouble setting it up. We went for a model that doesn't have any trusses across the width of the hoop house. They're definitely stronger if you do have trusses. But this has been here for 13 years and it hasn't collapsed at all. We had a bit of trouble. We added in some diagonal bracing at the west end because that's the direction the strongest winds come from. And we noticed when we changed the plastic that the whole thing was starting to lean a bit to the east. So we've beefed up the west end a bit.
Okay, what about irrigation in here?
Irrigation, we use drip irrigation. We've got 3 rows here in a 4-foot bed and 2 rows in a 2-foot bed. And the water supply comes from our well, and it comes in a frost-free hydrant, so we can water any time of year. We piped in the electricity and the water from a nearby building. We just use a mechanical timer. We don't use anything fancy. So we turn the water on and set the timer, and it will switch the water off, but we need to come back in the winter anyway to close the hydrant so it can drain down and not freeze.
Okay, and this is pretty maxed out in terms of bed space in here. You guys are doing 4-foot beds and 1-foot walkways?
That's right, 4-foot beds and 1-foot walkways. The 1-foot walkways are about the narrowest you would want to go. Some people say you don't want to go that narrow either. The 4-foot beds are too wide for most of us to jump across, but we can reach the middle from the edges. And so we think we've pretty much got the maximum amount of growing area that you sensibly could, unless you're very, very athletic.
Right, but it's pretty maxed out in here. This is great. And you said the beds on the outside are a little bit more narrow?
Yeah, they're 2 feet wide.
Okay, and that's just what worked out for the whole dimensionals?
Well, you need to, because you
can't reach in.
You can't reach in.
Okay.
You cannot, so you can only reach from the path across 2 feet, and that works well. So we decided from the beginning to insulate on the north side here. This is a 2-foot wide. It's like foil on top of bubble plastic, and partly we did this because we wanted to insulate it, because the edge beds are always in the winter colder than the ones in the middle. We also thought this would help to reflect light back a bit, and it certainly does that. So we've been happy with it, but it's not compatible with roll-up sides, obviously. So we've renewed the foil stuff. It maybe lasts about 8 or 9 years, I think.